In all the years I've sat on this bench, I've seen many things. I've seen remorse, I've seen fear, I've seen tears. But the young woman who entered the courtroom that day made me think for the first time. Some people are truly raised believing that the law doesn't apply to them, and today we're going to discuss the price of that belief. I said good morning to everyone and surveyed the courtroom. I've been serving in this courtroom for many years. I know well how people avert their eyes when lying, how the voices of those truly remorseful tremble, how fear and desperation manifest on faces. But that morning, the file before me was different. I could feel it even before opening it. Before me stood a 23-year-old young woman. Her name was Chloe Elizabeth Harrington. Date of birth, March 12, 2001. She lives in one of Providence's most expensive neighborhoods. Her father, Richard Harrington, is the CEO of one of the state's largest real estate companies. Multi-million-dollar projects, political connections, powerful names. But what mattered in this case wasn't whose daughter she was. What mattered was what she had done. 3 months ago, on August 15, 2024, at approximately 4:30 p.m., Chloe Harrington was driving a white 2024 Range Rover Sport in the Elmwood neighborhood. This was a residential area where children played in the streets, where elderly people crossed the road where the speed limit was 25 miles per hour. However, Chloe Harrington was traveling at 70 miles per hour on this street. This wasn't merely a speeding violation, this was disregarding human life. Police Officer Ethan Carter, badge number 347, with 18 years of service at the Providence Police Department, stopped the vehicle at the intersection of Cranston Street and Haskins Street. It was a routine traffic stop. At least that's how it began. When Officer Carter calmly asked why she had been stopped, the response he received was the first moment that determined the fate of this case. The exact words recorded in the police report were, "Do you know who my father is? He owns half this city. I can have your badge by tomorrow morning." When I read that sentence, I closed the file and took a deep breath. Because these words weren't just insolence. This was an open confession of how power poisons a person. But the story didn't end there. The truly disturbing parts hadn't yet begun. Police Officer Ethan Carter didn't raise his voice despite Chloe Harrington's words. With his 18 years of experience, he maintained his composure. He explained that children played on this street, that elderly people crossed the road, that a moment of speeding could have irreversible consequences. But not a single emotion stirred on the face of the young woman before him. There was no concern, no remorse. On the contrary, she was utterly confident. For Chloe Harrington, this moment wasn't a warning. It was a challenge. She slowly took out her phone. She turned on the camera. Her eyes were looking more at her screen than at the police officer, because for her, reality was there, in her followers, in the applause. "I'm recording this," she said with a cold expression. "Let people see what kind of person you are." There was no anger in that sentence, no threat. There was something worse, an absolute sense of superiority. The ease of someone who had been coddled on social media for years, declared right in every post, validated in every behavior. In her world, reality was shaped by the applause of the majority, and the majority was always on her side. Officer Carter didn't take the bait. He didn't engage in argument. He didn't succumb to his emotions. At 4:49 p.m., he followed procedure and issued the necessary citations: excessive speed, reckless driving, and endangering public safety. He recorded every line in the report without omission. This is what it meant to be a public servant, but for Chloe Harrington, this incident wasn't closed. On the contrary, for her, what happened was content. That same evening at 6:22 p.m., she posted the first video from her Instagram account with 47,000 followers. She was mocking police officer Ethan Carter, belittling him, portraying him as ordinary, winking at her followers. Comments began pouring in within minutes. "Queen," They don't know who you are. Put them in their place. The next morning at 10:15 a.m. came the second video. Same attitude, same arrogance, same belief in invincibility. One of the videos received over 12,000 views in just 24 hours alone. At this point, I realized this young woman didn't believe she was right. She was certain she was right. And applauded arrogance was the most dangerous arrogance. 3 days later, on August 18, 2024, at 2:15 p.m., a Ring doorbell camera at 247 Haskins Street in the Elmwood neighborhood captured a familiar image. The same white Range Rover, the same license plate, the same reckless speed. Chloe Harrington, as if nothing had happened, once again drove through the street disregarding people's lives. When I watched those images, I thought, this was no longer a mistake. This was a clear indication of a mind that believed itself untouchable, and such a mentality, if not stopped, would inevitably end in tragedy. After Chloe Harrington was recorded a second time in the same neighborhood with the same recklessness, the file was no longer just a traffic violation case. As the papers on my desk grew thicker, what I felt became clearer. This case had already begun to be played not in the courtroom, but behind the scenes. The first phone call came a few days after the incident, then the second, then the third. Each spoke with a different tone, but the same message. She's young, she made a mistake. Her family is very upset. Couldn't this not be blown out of proportion? Some spoke directly, others felt out the situation with indirect sentences. Then the visits began. A city council member stopped by. Then a lawyer from a well-known law firm. Later, a name with influence in the city's business circles. They all entered through the same door, saying the same sentences with different words. A solution had to be found. This matter should be settled amicably. It would be best for everyone. At one point, the subject explicitly turned to money. Donation to a youth foundation, contribution to a traffic safety fund, aid to police support associations. The figures mentioned were not to be scoffed at. But the issue wasn't the figures. The issue was what this courtroom served. For Chloe Harrington, all of this was the natural continuation of an expected process. She knew well her father's power, her circle's influence, how money silenced people. She had learned this way throughout her life. When a problem arose, someone would intervene, something would be discussed, and files would be closed. In her world, this case was no different. She was relaxed in her meetings with her lawyer. A fine at most, she would say, some community service, maybe a brief license suspension. There wasn't the slightest unease in her voice, because no wall she had encountered until today had truly been solid. But there was something she didn't know. This file wouldn't soften with phone calls, this case wouldn't close with donation promises, and this bench didn't resemble the world she was accustomed to. That day, when I was alone in my office, I opened the file once more. I thought about the streets in the Elmwood neighborhood, the children, the elderly, the people whose hearts leap into their throats when crossing the street. Then I thought, if this case isn't stopped here, next time, we might not just be watching a video. Chloe Harrington and her family believed this matter was resolved, but the hardest part hadn't yet begun, because some people only learn that they're not truly untouchable in a courtroom. When the day of the hearing arrived, the courtroom was more crowded than usual. There were whispers in the back rows. Everyone had understood that this case wasn't an ordinary traffic file. When I took my place on the bench, the door opened and Chloe Harrington entered. Her posture was self-assured. Her shoulders were straight. As she looked around, there was that familiar expression on her face suggesting she didn't belong here. I studied her. Rich kids had come to this courtroom before, but there was something different about Chloe. This wasn't fearlessness. This was an unshakable belief that nothing would happen to her. "Defendant Chloe Elizabeth Harrington," I said, "please stand." She stood. She didn't avert her eyes. We made eye contact for the first time. "Have you read the file?" I asked. "Yes," she said with a brief answer. "Is it true that on August 15th, you said to the police officer who stopped you for driving 70 miles per hour in a residential neighborhood, 'Do you know who my father is?'" She paused for a moment. An ambiguous smile appeared at the corner of her lips. "It was misunderstood," she said. "I was upset." "Were you just upset?" I asked. "Or did you believe that consequences didn't apply to you?" Silence fell over the courtroom. Chloe tilted her head slightly to the side. "I think this is being blown way out of proportion," she said. "I didn't hurt anyone." I had heard this sentence many times before. "The fact that you didn't cause harm," I said in a calm voice, "doesn't mean you won't cause harm." Chloe rolled her eyes. This small gesture was perhaps one of the most important moments in this case. Because at that moment I saw that she still wasn't taking it seriously. 3 days later, I said, "On August 18th, you were recorded again in the same neighborhood. How do you explain this?" She shrugged. "You're exaggerating," she said. "Everyone drives fast sometimes." "Everyone," I said, "doesn't do the same thing again 3 days after being caught." For the first time, the expression on her face changed. A very small crack formed, but she immediately recovered. "My father's lawyers will handle this," she said. "That's why I'm here anyway." At that moment, I put my pen down on the desk. "You're mistaken," I said. "The reason you're here isn't your father. The reason you're here is the choices you made." Chloe opened her mouth to say something but stopped. For the first time, there was an authority before her that she couldn't control, and for the first time, there was no applause in that courtroom. I remember very clearly the moment I noticed in Chloe Harrington's eyes that the conversation had changed direction. Her shoulders, which had been relaxed just moments ago, tensed. She was struggling to keep her legs steady. That confidence, fed by applause, was slowly becoming meaningless in the silence of this courtroom. "Let's clarify something," I said. "This courtroom is not your social media account. There are no likes here, no comments, no applause." Chloe lifted her head. "I was just defending myself," she said. "The officer who stopped me provoked me too." With this sentence, there was a slight murmur in the courtroom. "Is provocation," I said, "reminding you of the speed limit?" "He humiliated me in front of everyone," she said. "If I hadn't taken out my phone, no one would have listened to my side." There it was. The truth had emerged clearly for the first time. In her world, justice was achieved not by being heard, but by being visible. "A side," I said slowly, "is not the law, Ms. Harrington." Her lawyer leaned forward slightly, as if wanting to whisper something, but Chloe stopped him with her hand. She wanted to speak. She wanted to regain control. "I'm not a bad person," she said. "I didn't hurt anyone. Everyone is exaggerating this." "Well then," I said, "on August 18th, 3 days later, why did you drive the same way in the same neighborhood again?" She fell silent for a moment. "It was bad luck," she said. "I feel like I was being followed." With this sentence, the defense began to collapse, because now the blame was on others, the system, the police, the cameras, but never herself. "Ms. Harrington," I said, "being caught twice is not bad luck. This is a pattern of behavior." Whether her eyes welled up or there was just anger, it was hard to tell, but her voice hardened. "Everyone makes mistakes," she said. "Why is my mistake being blown up like this?" "Because," I said, "instead of correcting your mistakes, you repeated them, and worse, you mocked them." I pulled out the Instagram videos from the file. They were projected on the screen. The silence in the courtroom grew heavier. "In these videos," I said, "there's no remorse, no shame, no responsibility." Chloe looked at the screen. For the first time, she averted her gaze. At that moment, something broke in her defense. Where the applause had fallen silent, the truth had begun to speak. The courtroom was silent. It was such a silence that I could even hear people breathing. Chloe Harrington had looked away from the screen, but still wasn't looking at me. I closed the file and began to speak as if addressing not her, but the courtroom, because these words were not only for a defendant, but for everyone watching this case. On this bench, I said, I have served for over 30 years. I've seen mistakes made by young people. I've seen those trembling with fear. I've seen those shedding tears. I've seen genuine remorse. I paused for a moment. And I can say clearly, I said, this courtroom is not a merciless place. On the contrary, I believe in the power of mercy. Chloe lifted her head slightly, as if this sentence had cracked open a door she'd been waiting for. However, I said, making my voice a bit clearer, mercy without accountability is not justice. With these words, the hopeful expression on her face vanished. A judge, I said, doesn't seek revenge when sentencing. We're not here to ruin lives. Our duty is 4 things: to punish wrongdoing, to prevent its repetition, to send a message to society, and most importantly, to protect people. Everyone's eyes in the courtroom were on me. What disturbs me most in this file, I said, is not the speed, not the video, not even social media. I paused for a moment. It's the attitude. Chloe's fingers interlocked. In your actions, I said, there's not the slightest awareness of others' lives. You didn't think about the families living in that neighborhood, the elderly, the children. The only thing you thought about was the belief that you were untouchable. I turned my eyes to her. And that belief, I said, is the most dangerous one. There wasn't even a stir in the courtroom. If, I said, you had shown remorse when you were stopped on August 15th, if you hadn't posted those videos, if you hadn't repeated the same behavior 3 days later, I shook my head from side to side. Then today we would be having a very different conversation here. For the first time, a real weight appeared on Chloe's face. Being young, I said, doesn't make you innocent. Being wealthy, I said, doesn't exempt you. Having a last name, I said, doesn't protect you from consequences. Then I completed the sentence slowly. In this courtroom, no one is above the law. And now everyone knew the verdict was near. After my words ended, there was a long silence in the courtroom. This was a silence in which people couldn't speak. Everyone sensed that the sentences about to be spoken would be irreversible. Chloe Harrington was now looking at me, but there was no defiance in that look. For the first time, there was the unease of someone who had to wait. I reopened the file. I have heard the prosecution's request, I said. I have also heard the defense's requests. I have examined in detail the evidence, reports, and footage presented by both sides. Chloe cast a brief glance at her lawyer. Her lawyer had bowed his head slightly. This was a landscape she had never seen before. This court, I said, when making a decision must consider not only today, but also tomorrow. Everyone in the courtroom was listening silently. If, I said, a clear message is not given here today, this pattern of behavior will continue, and the next file may no longer be a ring camera video. I paused for a moment. The next file, I said, could be an ambulance report. It could be a death certificate. Chloe's face paled. Therefore, I said, the sentence to be given in this case is not only directed at the defendant. This sentence is for everyone watching this courtroom. I took my pen in hand. This small gesture increased the tension in the courtroom. Ms. Harrington, I said, you are not being tried here today solely for speeding. I clarified my voice. You are here because you belittled a police officer, because you disregarded society, because you repeated the same behavior despite being warned, and most importantly, because you thought your actions had no consequences. Chloe swallowed. This court, I said, is not here to humiliate you, but it must stop you. On some faces in the courtroom there was shock, on others approval. Because, I said, sometimes the greatest kindness given to people is setting boundaries for them. I closed the file. Now, I said, I have explained the reasoning for my decision. Shortly, I will announce the consequence of this reasoning. At that moment, Chloe Harrington bowed her head for the first time. In the courtroom, no one was holding their breath anymore. Everyone had forgotten to breathe. The courtroom was so silent that even the rustling of papers echoed. Chloe Harrington waited with her head bowed. She too knew there was nothing left to defend. I straightened up on the bench and spoke one last time before announcing my decision. Because some decisions aren't just read, they must be understood. "Ms. Harrington," I said, "this court will make a harsh decision today, but this harshness is not about anger, it's about responsibility." She raised her head. For the first time, there was something resembling fear in her eyes. "On August 15, 2024, I said, I sentence you to the maximum penalty for excessive speed and reckless driving in a residential neighborhood. Furthermore, because you repeated the same behavior 3 days later, this sentence will be applied consecutively." There was a stir in the courtroom. "In total," I said in a clear voice, "you are receiving 8 months in prison. You will serve this time in the women's division." Chloe's face turned chalk white. "Your license," I said, "is suspended for 3 years effective today. At the end of this period, you will retake both the written and practical exams." I paused for a moment. "Additionally," I said, "you will pay a fine of $15,000 and perform 200 hours of community service. You will fulfill this service by working with families of traffic accident victims." Chloe was crying now, but these tears had come after the applause had fallen silent. "I want to say this very clearly," I said. "This decision is not to destroy you, it's to stop you." I looked at the courtroom. "In 8 months you will still be young," I said. "You will still have a life. But I hope you emerge from this time having learned that other people's lives are no less valuable than your decisions." Then I softened my voice slightly. "Because," I said, "I don't want you standing here next time because you harmed someone." Chloe nodded. She couldn't speak. I turned to Police Officer Ethan Carter. "Officer Carter," I said, "thank you for performing your duty with professionalism. This court commends you." As I spoke my final sentence, I looked at everyone in the courtroom. "This case," I said, "is not about wealth. It's not about last names. It's not about connections." Then I clarified, "This case is about responsibility." I struck the gavel. "Court is adjourned." As Chloe Harrington was escorted out of the courtroom, no one was looking at her anymore. There was no applause, no camera, only reality. And I thought to myself, if there is justice in a city, people are safe. Because one thing never changes on this bench: no one, not a single person, is above the law. I am Judge Caprio. Remember, sometimes the right decision isn't written in books. You feel it in your heart. But when money, power, and privilege are involved, it's not emotions that speak, it's the law. And the law states very clearly, neither last names, nor bank accounts, nor phone calls made on your behalf. None of them, absolutely none of them, are above the law. For more stories inspired by real events like this one, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, turn on notifications, and write in the comments which city you're watching from.